When it comes to drawing faces, there are always subtle differences that distinguish masculine qualities from feminine qualities. And in today's video, we will be learning specifically how to draw a boy, and through that process, we will learn how to make a face slightly more masculine through the use of some unique materials. So with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore a variety of art-related topics. And in today's tutorial, we will be breaking down the process of how to draw a boy with some colored pencils. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. Now, there are many ways to make a portrait, and you can do so with paints or you can do so with drawing mediums, but in today's tutorial we will be looking specifically at how to create something unique and interesting through the use of some traditional colored pencils. So make sure you have some good materials, and once you have all your materials, make sure that you're ready and we can engage with the process. Now, the way in which we're going to start is we're going to start with a basic sketch of a boy's face. Now, in this tutorial we are using a very specific image, however you can apply this process to your own image. But the idea here is that we're going to start by creating this oval shape with a smaller circle position at the top of the head. Now from there we can start adding in these horizontal lines to indicate the position of various features, and basically we want to then work with these horizontal lines to indicate the position of various features within the face. So as we kind of add in these horizontal lines, a good way to test out the size and proportions is to first sketch out the nose quite quickly, which should be positioned just above the small circle. If it seems too large or too small, you can simply erase and adjust the guidelines. At this point, we're keeping our sketch quite loose, trying to establish just scale, size, and positioning of various features. Now, once we feel that our head shape and guidelines seem proportional, we want to start with the eyes. Now, the eyes do take some time, so this is why we do want to start with them, and they are a really good reference point in terms of positioning other features, and we kind of use them as a measurement for scale for the other features. We will want to draw the face from a slight angle as well. So again, there are many ways to draw a face, but in this particular tutorial, we will be drawing a face from a slight angle to create a little bit more of a nuance within the facial position and pose, and it ultimately just makes it a little bit interesting. Now, as we sketch the face, we can also consider sketching the face from a side angle. Again, you can follow either the reference image used within this tutorial, or you can use your own reference image, but working with something a little more interesting in terms of drawing a face from a side angle gives you a very unique drawing challenge. So as we proceed with drawing a face from an angle, another thing to consider is that some features will be slightly more in the foreground to that of others, so we want to think about those subtle distortions within the facial features as we proceed with sketching in the face. As we proceed with the sketching process, it will take some time, and we want to focus on single features for a good portion of time before moving on to the next. So we want to make sure we use the guidelines to position the different features and consider the subtle distortions in size because we are drawing a face from an angle. Now, as we proceed with this early sketching phase, we can already start to think about how we can give the face a masculine quality. And we can start already by making the eyebrows slightly more disheveled and thick. Another way to do this, or to kind of give the face slightly more masculine qualities, is to keep the eyes slightly more narrow and arrowhead shaped. And as we slowly start to sketch in the nose, we can give the nose slightly more prominence, making the ridge protrude slightly more than that of a more subtle ridge in a nose. And this is just another small way to kind of give the face a more masculine quality. Now, as we proceed with our drawing process, again, we can keep it quite light at this point. We really want to make sure that we're taking our time, working out the different features and making sure that we are placing them in their correct spaces. Now, focusing on the nose again, as we continue with our sketch, we want to make sure the ridge protrudes slightly, and that the furthest nostril is slightly smaller due to the perspective. Again, we really want to consider all these smaller details in terms of how we are representing a face from a side angle, and naturally this will cause some of the features to be slightly larger or slightly smaller than others. As we come to the mouth area, we want to make sure that there is a decent indentation between the upper lip and the bottom of the nose. Again, the philtrum area is what this is called, and it's a very unique aspect in terms of creating that realistic transition from the upper features into the lower features, such as the nose forming into the mouth. Now, what we can do at this point is we can slowly take our time working out these features. Again, consider using a reference image. You're more than welcome to use the reference image within this tutorial in the link below. Otherwise, you can apply this process to your own reference image or source image from the internet. But take your time establishing creating a light sketch of the features, making sure that the scale of them makes sense, the placement of them makes sense, and if you're drawing your face from an angle, consider the subtle distortions within the face. Now we can slowly move on to refining the sketch, and once we have a general positioning of the facial features, we want to start forming the facial structure and refining the facial features. Now, starting with the jawline, we want to make sure that we give the boy drawing quite a strong rounded chin and a distinct jawline. This is just another way to give the facial features a more masculine quality, such as obviously the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose. And as we move our way down to the lower features such as the mouth, we can keep the lips kind of narrow and smaller, but as we get to the jawline, we can really emphasize that square-like jaw structure to create a more masculine quality within the boy's facial features. Now we also want to refine the lips with some light shading, so make sure they are positioned correctly according to the angle from which we are drawing our boy. So again, naturally that is something we want to consider in terms of how we are defining features, if we are drawing them from a unique side angle or something along those lines. Now at this point, we want to take time going through all the features using both our pencils and erasers to slightly tweak and refine the details in the face as we go. We want to consider the angle once again in terms of how this distorts all the features, not just the nose, not just the mouth, but how they collectively or consistently kind of form along the same type of distorted plane that moves through the face. We can also make sure that the bottom of the earlobes fall along the same horizontal plane as that of the bottom section of the nose. This is just another way to kind of keep the consistency, a more realistic quality in terms of feature placements within the face. But again, take your time going through the sketch, making sure the eyes are positioned correctly. And another aspect we want to start considering is how to create suggestive marks that kind of define the hair and hairline. So we want to remember that the hairline should always come near to the top of the forehead and not sit on top of the head directly. That's just not a natural way of how a hairline forms unless we are drawing a bald figure. But in this case, we can create a more normal hairline that kind of forms along the top of the forehead. But as we continue, we do want to make sure that we are slowly working in these light sketching marks of all the features, making sure we are tending to all the features and making sure that they are positioned consistently and accurately within the facial structure of our boy drawing. So we really want to make sure we capture this early sketching process or part of our boy sketch in terms of placement of features, because as we move on to adding color, then we can't necessarily take those marks back. So make sure that you're satisfied with the placement of features, that you're satisfied with the overall structure and shape of the various features within the face of your boy drawing. Now, before we move on to adding color, we want to just take a quick scan over all the details of the face. Again, making sure that we haven't missed anything. We do want to consider all the features before moving on to adding color. Now, once we are satisfied with our sketch, we can start to play around with our colors. And this is where colored pencils become a really unique medium in terms of its unique ability to create blends of colors. So for instance, you can really play around with your color choice. You don't necessarily need to stick to conventional colors. You can play around with blues and purples. It's really up to you. But the idea here is that we're going to start with the eyes, because the eyes are generally the most complicated structure within a face, especially in terms of colors, and this is because they are really complex within their structure. So using your pencils, we want to consider what kind of color eyes we would like to create. Again, we can use a combination of light mediums and darker colors, which can be your choice completely, but we do want to start with the iris of the eyes, and this is where we can start to work in those details of creating a very unique color combination in terms of what the eyes could be. So we can work with blues, purples, it's really up to us, but as we work in those details, we want to basically work in these little fine colored strokes within the iris, and we can already start to consider darkening or blackening completely the pupil within the iris. Now again, the eyes are a really complex feature, and as we kind of work in these very unique colored pencil qualities, the idea is to kind of build up layers. When you're working with colors, you always want to consider building up your layers from lighter tonal values to darker tonal values. So we can already start to think about color blends that we want within our facial features, and this is where we can basically start by the eyes in terms of our colored choice. So a good idea is that when you think about color blends that work well, if you're going to work with blues blend into purples and ultimately into reds, applying that kind of concept in terms of what you would like your overall color blend or color palette in the face to be is really up to you, but you do want to think about which colors blend well. Now, continuing to work on the eyes, again, the idea here is to really focus on on the very unique qualities of the eyes, but we can also start to work on the details around the eyes. Now, as we slowly build up the features within the eyes, we also want to consider light and shadow, and this is where we kind of use our color blend strategically. So for instance, some of the features around the eyes protrude, and this is where we start to think about the eyelids being exposed to a light source. We want to make sure that we're aware of the fact that we want to create these moments of highlights, and that's where we basically are strategic about where we shade with our colors. Naturally, as we work on the eyes, we want to think about indentations and areas of the eyes where shadows would naturally occur, and this is where we can see how the eyebrow ridge causes shadowing on top of the eyelids, but then naturally, because the eyelids protrude, there are moments that are highlighted or exposed to a light source, and therefore we want to make sure that we are kind of keeping some of those areas negative or left out in terms of creating that distinction between shadowed areas and highlighted areas. Now, do take your time. As you slowly develop the coloration around the eyes, you will find that this can kind of set the tone for where you can head or kind of go throughout the entire face in terms of color choice. So slowly, as you work in these color blends, for instance, let's say you want to create darker shadow formations with these blues and purples, you can start to create lighter tonal values with colors such as oranges and reds that can slowly work from those purples into these lighter colors, and ultimately can be used quite strategically to create these highlighted moments instead of just leaving negative spaces. That being said, a really good idea is, as you kind of start to work into spaces that are really exposed to a light source, such as the ridge of the nose, we will find that we can slowly drift our way into these lighter color tones. Again, if we're creating these shadowed moments with darker colors like blues and purples, we can then drift into these lighter color palettes or tones such as maybe oranges and reds and even pinks. And again, naturally, we just want to consider colors in terms of how they are darker and lighter on the spectrum and how to kind of use them strategically to enhance certain features. So when we come to the nose area, we'll find that the ridge of the nose tends to be the most highlighted quality of the nose because of how exposed it is to a light source, the same as the tip of the nose. But as we work our way to the bottom features of the nose, near the nostrils and near the area where the nose connects to the philtrum and ultimately to the upper lip, those areas tend to be slightly more shadowed, but there are degrees of how exposed certain features are to a light source. So really considering this full spectrum of what kind of color tonal values work well with which areas have the most shadows and the least shadows is really essential in terms of having a really beautiful and well-rounded and well-blended color palette within your face. But this is also a color exploration, so see this as a way to explore various colors. Again, we don't have to draw a face in a conventional way. Is also a great opportunity to be abstract with your color exploration. So play around with your color choices and allow yourself to work your way through the entire face, seeing how you can create these seamless transitions between unique color blends. It's really up to you. Allow yourself to play around with how to integrate color into your portrait. Just keep in mind two key concepts, and that is shadow and light. Now, another key feature to think about because of how dark they usually are is the hair on the face, more specifically the eyebrows. Now, again, we can really consider the color choice that we are working with and how to integrate these colors in a strategic way to represent darker features. So we don't necessarily just need to use blacks. Black is a very simplistic way of creating darker features, and we can use that later on strategically with a darker medium, let's say ballpoint pen. But in this case, you can build up the eyebrows through these strokes of little lines with maybe blues and purples, ultimately making sure you're working your way in a natural position in terms of how the eyebrows form along the face. Now remember, the eyebrows do move away from the face and not inwardly, so we do want to make sure that as we make these strokes, we are making them away from the face or away from the center of the face as we come to the corners of the eyes. Now, as you proceed with this process, really consider again for each feature how you can build up these layers from light to dark. Another key thing to think about is when you're creating a variety of tonal values, especially in something very complex where you want subtle transitions and blends within colors, is that you always want to build your tonal values from lighter to darker colors. So that's something to think about even with the eyebrows, within the eyes, within the nose, and as you continue with coloring your drawing as you move your way through the face. Now again, this process of building up tonal values can be applied to the lips as well as we move our way down the face into the lip area and the lower facial features. And again, naturally we want to think about which areas will have the least amount of light and which areas will be exposed. exposed. So naturally with lips, we'll find that the bottom lip tends to be more exposed to a light source because it curves in an upward direction, whereas the upper lip tends to be slightly darker, and that's because it kind of faces a downward direction. But as we kind of continue with the shading process, we can also think about the subtle representation of teeth within the mouth, and then also how to darken the gaps inside the mouth. And again, just continuing this process of playing around with our color values and what kind of colors we'd like to represent. Now, another thing to think about with lips is that they do tend to have a textural quality to them. So they are quite hard in the sense, or reflective in the sense that they are capable of reflecting light, and due to that fact they do have these subtle ridges and lines that move through the lips. So it also depends on how moist lips are, but we can kind of give the lips a realistic quality by kind of working in some line work to establish a little bit more of a lip-like quality. So we also want to think about the textural qualities of the various facial features. So as we add in some colored pencil marks, we don't just want to color in features, but we want to think about tonal value, light and shadow, and then textural qualities of these various features. Now, as we proceed with this process, we can also start to think about how to, again, slowly build up these layers, working our way through these various features. At this point, we should have a lot of the features colored, but then we'll find that in some areas of the face, there will be these darker shadows. So this is where we can consider areas where there are very strong protrusions in the face, or that being said, the various orifices within the face, such as the mouth and the nostrils, and these areas will tend to be quite dark naturally because light struggles to penetrate these various features. Now, take your time working through your facial structure. We are going to eventually darken and enhance these features with a ballpoint pen to give a little bit more contrast and some more detailed line work, but at this point we are really considering building up these layers of color, keeping a few things in mind, and that is light and shadow, textural qualities, and then naturally our color blends in terms of which ones drift towards a lighter tonal value and which ones drift towards a darker tonal value. Now again, before we move on to the later stages of enhancing our drawing with some darker mediums such as ballpoint pen, we can first pay attention to the hair. Again, when it comes to hair, we always want to think about it the way it kind of is in real life, and that is basically a bunch of strands which could be defined as a bunch of lines connected to a head structure that move in a particular direction. In this case, we can draw a more naturalistic hairstyle with the hair kind of moving up, and thinking again through the structural quality or the textural quality of this particular feature. We're not necessarily shading it in a conventional way, but we are using line work to keep a consistency with the actual textural nature of real hair. Another thing we can think about is being very strategic with these darker moments and moments of negative space to really represent qualities of highlights and then qualities of shadow within the hair. With hair, we are proceeding with the same process in terms of building up our tonal values from lighter to darker, but what's different to hair in terms of how we shade in hair to, or compared to that of the other features, is that we are specifically using line work to establish these qualities and then strategically leaving out negative spaces to create highlights within the hair. So again, thinking about structure of the hair, direction, flow, building up these lighter tonal values, enhancing them with some darker marks, eventually strategically incorporating these darker marks to represent shadows, and then we can also work in these more subtle shadows within the face where they basically form along the forehead due to the fact of the hair casting a shadow onto the face, or these shadows that kind of define the cheekbones that move around the nose, maybe some shadowing behind the nose if we are drawing the face from an angle, and then also working in these details into the ears and surrounding contextualizing features such as the neck. But ultimately, as you build up these colors, all those key concepts are the same in terms of how we work on each feature one at a time, making sure we build up our color values within our face before proceeding with ballpoint pen to enhance these features and darken them. Now, once we are completely satisfied and we have created basically a complete drawing with just colored pencil, we're going to move on to working with another unique medium, and that is ballpoint pen. Ballpoint pen works really well with colored pencils because it can be used very strategically to darken features, enhance them, and it just layers really beautifully on top of colored pencils. Now we're going to proceed chronologically the same as we did with the coloring process, where we start with the eyes, move our way through the face, and again, the idea is that we are simply enhancing these features. We are not necessarily overpowering them. And what we'll find is that using a very dark medium in these later stages can be a really effective way to enhance features and ultimately make them slightly more three-dimensional with these really darker moments of shadow formation. Always think that shadows are represented within a drawing through the process of shading, and that is simply what shading is. Now, as we continue, again, we want to make sure that we first work through the eyes, darkening the shadows around the eyelids, making sure that we are working with the gradients we've established with our color pencils. We can also proceed to darken the eyebrows with some pen lines, and again, doing the same thing, making sure we are making these strokes that move away from the center of the head towards the outer corners of the eyes, but slowly working through these features, darkening the pupils, making sure we are adding these little lines into the iris of the eyes. Maybe we can darken the eyelashes themselves, and slowly working in some pen shading that moves around the eyelids near the eyebrows or the brow ridge, where the shadows would be most present. Now, as we work our way down the face, we can do so with the nose as well. So remember, with ballpoint pen, the ink comes out quite sparingly, so it works quite similar to that of a pencil. However, you do want some scrap paper nearby just to scribble any excess ink that is built up in the pen before proceeding with your shading. But we can do this process of darkening the most dark areas, or the areas where the shadows are most present, and then from there we can consider how the gradients we've established with our colors can be enhanced with some ballpoint pen shading. And this is specifically true for areas, again, where there are great protrusions within the face. So we'll see that near the bottom of the nose, the shadows tend to become slightly darker, or as we move our way through the mouth, we can see that the indentations or the orifice quality of the mouth, where there are gaps on either side of the teeth, tend to be quite dark. And then obviously areas where the philtrum connects to the nose and flows to the mouth area or the top lip, but then also thinking about how the top lip is slightly darker than that of the lower lip. So again, the key concepts here we are thinking about are really just a matter of understanding light and shadow, and how we use our medium to represent these qualities in a way that is very strategic in terms of colored pencils from darker colors to lighter colors, and then ultimately enhancing these darker areas with some ballpoint pen shading. Once again, we are not overpowering our color process here or our colored in features, except we are lightly working with our ballpoint pen to build up darker layers in any areas that need be. But this process can be applied to all areas of the face as we slowly build up our drawing of a boy, making sure that we are also paying attention to these little smaller details and nuances in the various features that can also give a more masculine touch to the various features within the face. Again, making those eyebrows disheveled, making sure that the ridge of the nose is quite prominent and strong, making sure that the lips are quite neutral, that the lips aren't necessarily too large, and also that those eyes tend to be slightly more narrow and a little more spearheaded, in the sense that we do want to keep these qualities a little more subtle to that of a more feminine aesthetic. But otherwise, we can proceed with this process, slowly integrating some pen shading into the entire face, making sure that we are basically attending to all the darkest areas that we've established with our colored pencils, and ultimately enhancing them with some light ballpoint pen shading. But otherwise, guys, this is the general process of how to approach a drawing of a boy. Again, there are many ways to do so, but however you do so, some key things to think about are the small nuances that make the face slightly more masculine, maybe like disheveled eyebrows, a more prominent ridge in the nose, more narrow eyes, and then ultimately thinking about the contextualizing features such as hair, and how these can be additional ways in terms of giving a more masculine touch to the face. And then from there, it's a matter of building up your color values if you are coloring in the face, ultimately thinking about what kind of colors work well in terms of creating dark and lighter tonal values, and then ultimately refining these qualities with maybe a darker medium, and that can obviously be pencil, or it can be a ballpoint pen or something of that nature. But this process we can continue and kind of apply to all the facial features, and making sure we are really thinking about light and shadow, and how each of these structures uniquely interact with light and shadow, and what that is doing in terms of how we represent them in the drawing, texturally, but then also just realistically in terms of shadow formation. But otherwise, guys, that is it from me today. I hope this video was really helpful and informative. I hope there are some key concepts and ideas and drawing process you can take into your own artwork. If you like the video and if you are interested in related topics, please let us know in the comment section below. Please also like the video and drop a subscribe. That ultimately helps us to grow the channel, which enables us to make more art related content for you guys, which we love. But otherwise, guys, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. Until next time, cheers.